Thank you, Madam Speaker and committee. Madam Speaker, Chairman, thank you very much. 6 years ago, when I decided to run for office, I imagined all of the good things that a state representative could do for the people in the Tennessee State Legislature. I was here for a while and realized that I had on rose-colored glasses. I had plans to do wonderful things, and I would go to some of these departments, for instance, the Department of Human Services, and say, I think maybe we should take the cash benefit away from people who are receiving cash and maybe give that to them in vouchers for gas or for their phone bill vouchers instead of giving them cash. I'd had people tell me that some of that cash was actually used on lottery tickets. So I thought this is something we could do for our great state of Tennessee. And I was soon told that we can't do that because the federal government has said that we can't take that benefit away to use it as vouchers and that they can have the cash. And we know that Tennessee knows how to manage money. Our state would know how to manage that program. That program also has maintenance of effort requirements in it. So many of the programs that we come here thinking we can make strong, we can make good for our state. But what happens is we have federal regulations and federal mandates that make us unable to be able to do that. No wonder the debt is skyrocketing. We live in a state with the lowest per capita debt in the nation. Tennesseans know how to manage money. And in the meantime, the federal government, the debt is skyrocketing. Our grandchildren and children are already in debt, and they have never held a job yet. We understand that at some point, this has to stop. Last year, the EPA promulgated the Waters of the U.S. rule. Basically, that rule says if you have a post hole on your farm, that it can be regulated by the EPA if any water stands in the post hole. And they'll regulate that not by coming and looking at your farm. They will regulate that from an office on a computer that is telling them there's water in that post hole on your farm. So these rules are being promulgated without looking at our property, without knowing what's going on in the state of Tennessee. And every one of us knows the absurdity of that. As a matter of fact, our Attorney General joined with several other states in a lawsuit that has now held up that Waters of the U.S. rule because Tennessee, our department, would know how to manage our property. Right now, there is an injunction. That rule is not being promulgated in Tennessee. However, we are already making plans to make that happen because we know that if something happened and we were not doing that, we could get huge fines if that injunction is turned around. And yet the EPA themselves have been the culprit in several high-profile incidents recently, costing taxpayers millions and possibly endangering people's lives. But what consequence do they pay? Nothing. And the taxpayer foots the bill for all of that. The EPA, the IRS, the Department of Education, many of those entities are out of control, and Congress seems complicit, and we, the people, are paying for everything and face dire consequences when we don't comply. Every one of us knows we have an inflated federal budget, borrowing billions of that money. Billions we are borrowing, and taxpayers are only receiving pennies on the dollar for most of the programs because the bureaucracy and the administration of those programs cost so much. 3 years ago, a person in my district did a flow chart of the money in education in our district. And the flow chart turned out to be an inverted triangle. And at the top of that triangle, you had administrative costs, you had compliance people, and at the very bottom of that triangle, you had the student and the teacher receiving some of that money because of all the mandates, the compliance regulations that are put on our local boards of education, unfunded mandates. And we need, as a state, to say, we can do better with our money. We have teachers in my own district spending $1,500 of their money a year, their personal money, buying resources for their classes. That should not have to happen. One school opted out of the federal lunch program because by the time they came in and told them everything they had to do for that lunch program, this school said, you know what? Keep your $28,000 a year of federal money because we can feed our kids food that they will actually eat and we can do it cheaper and more efficiently. These are examples of the hundreds of unfunded mandates from the federal government for which Tennessee is footing the bill, and there is no end in sight. This is happening on a daily basis. The truth is that the federal government is no longer limited and no longer delegated. 2 years ago in December, I heard about a meeting that was going to be held in Mount Vernon. It was called the Assembly of States. And it really piqued my interest, and I thought, I'm going to go see what that meeting is about. So on a Friday morning, about 6 o'clock in the morning, I got in my car on a rainy day and thought, I'm driving up to Mount Vernon. Let's see what this meeting is about. I got there, and the next morning at 8 o'clock, I went in with 32 other legislators in Mount Vernon who said, we need to explore this idea of an assembly of the states, a convention of the states, to propose amendments to the Constitution, because the state has the authority to do that. And with what's happening in D.C., we know they are not going to control themselves. So that day, I happened to be pleasantly surprised that Senator Mike Bell was there also. So we worked together on this. He carried this resolution through the Senate. It has passed the Senate. We have 57 House sponsors. And those in attendance that day agreed that it was time for the states to take some action that is actually afforded to us in the Constitution, in Article 5. Just before the end of the convention in 1787, one of the founding fathers, George Mason, realized that the states needed a constitutional remedy for an overreaching federal government that would not restrain itself. He insisted on adding a state-led initiative to Article 5 for proposing amendments to the Constitution. If there was ever a time in the history of our republic that states need to take advantage of having that constitutional authority, it is now. Now, I used to be one of those people who said, we don't need to have a con-con. The Constitution could get open. This right here is the constitutional remedy for that. And with what's going on in D.C. right now, states have the authority to have the opportunity to remedy that. And I stand with Tennessee and 57 other House sponsors in saying this is our constitutional remedy, and we would like to join other states in doing that. So with that explanation, I would like to go out of session and ask for Scott Williams, with the Tennessee Director of the Convention for the States, might speak to you a few moments.
Without objection, we're out of session.
Thank you.
Would you please come forward and speak your name and your position, please? And you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My name is Scott Williams, and I am the Tennessee State Director for the Convention of States Project. With a loose microphone. I want to talk to you for just a minute. Representative Butt did a phenomenal job stating our position in the issues that we have with the federal overreach and the ability to solve those issues using Article 5 within the Constitution. We were given 2 ways to amend the Constitution. One, of course, was through Congress, which we've always done. The other was through the states. Now, we've never had a convention of the states per se, but that doesn't mean it hasn't been tried. Going back to our Bill of Rights in 1789, they almost didn't come about until Virginia applied for the very first Article 5 convention, convinced Congress that they really needed to move on a Bill of Rights, and so they gave that to us. Much of what I was going to say actually is, again, Representative Butt did a tremendous job stating the case I was going to make. So I'd like to end this actually with a personal note. But before I do that, I want you to see what I have before me. What I'm holding up now, is a small Constitution, pocket Constitution. Most of us have carried this. This is what we see as our Constitution. Now, I was an Army pilot, and I swore to defend the Constitution. This is what I felt I was swearing to defend. This is our annotated Constitution. It is 2,800 pages long. It consists of every ruling of the Supreme Court that is twisted and distorted what our founders originally meant. Now, to be true, there are some good rulings in there, and those need to be protected, but they are far outweighed by the bad ones. But what I'd like to talk to you about is just my service and a little bit about some people I learned about along the way. I come from a long time of volunteers going back to colonial days. My members of my family were involved in the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, the Spanish-American War, World War I and II, Korean War, Vietnam, and I was a Cold War helicopter pilot. I want to tell you about April 18th in 1985. An A-37 Dragonfly, which is an aircraft from the Air Force, crashed into a lagoon on Punta Sal, Honduras. On boards were Captain Donald Benton and his co-pilot, Captain Ronald Schatz. I was the pilot of a medevac helicopter stationed at an airfield 15 miles away. My crew and I were notified and asked to attempt a rescue. We were very low on fuel and rightfully could have refused that mission. But that was not an option for us. We were off the ground in just over a minute. When we got to the lagoon, we found that there was a rainbow sheen of oil covering the surface. I hovered above the water, hoping to catch any sign of life. A helmet floated to the surface, and I went lower still to attempt a rescue. I dipped my aircraft so low into the water that I could see fish swimming in my helicopter's chin bubble. As I maneuvered closer to the helmet, our electrical fuel pumps, because they were submerged, had shorted out. Thankfully, our mechanical pumps were doing their job. When we were finally able to grab the helmet, it was only to confirm that both pilots had died in the crash. Pardon me, my pages are stuck. We'd done everything we could. Heavy in heart, we left the scene for the Navy divers to recover the two captains. By the time we returned to the airfield, we had used all of our fuel's main tanks and most of the fuel in our 20-minute reserve. Such is the risk you take when wearing the uniform of this nation. Captain Benton and Captain Schatz lost their lives that day. My crew and I could have lost ours. Why did Captain Benton and Schatz willingly put their lives on the line? Why did my crew willingly go with me to search for them? Well, they did it for liberty. They did it for the rule of law. They did it for love of country. They did not do it for the dirt we stand on, but for the ideals found in our Constitution, which they took an oath to defend. They did it so that good men and women can peacefully represent their neighbors in state houses across this land. Every day we allow our country to morph away from the republic defined in 1787. By our Constitution, we dishonor their sacrifice. We mock what they have given. These men and many who have died before and since can no longer defend this Constitution. Their job is done. We, the living, must now do ours. The republic is in danger, and the last legal, moral, and nonviolent way to save it is before us. I urge you to support SJR 0067, the application for a convention of states. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. And if we could just take a few minutes and hear Mark Meckler, who is with the National Convention of the States Project, please.
Please come forward and state your name and position for the record, please.
Yes, ma'am. My name is Mark Meckler. That's spelled M-E-C-K-L-E-R, and I am the National President for the Convention of States Project. Madam Chairwoman and members of the committee, it's really an honor to stand before you today, and I've traveled around to 34 states across this great country and been before many committees like this in the last couple of years. Tennessee holds a special place in the nation right now as you are considering this matter early in the process in your legislative session and have the opportunity to be first in the nation in 2016 to approve this resolution. This is tied to a historic duty that was given to you in 1787 at the Constitutional Convention. And the story of how this particular part of Article 5 got into the Constitution is relevant to our discussions here today. On September 15th in 1787, Colonel George Mason stood and addressed the Assembly. It's 2 days before the end of the convention in 1787. You can imagine they were tired. They were getting ready to go home. But Mason had discovered a fatal flaw in the Constitution as drafted, and he pointed it out to his fellow delegates like this. He said, "We've drafted a Constitution that gives the federal government the authority to propose amendments should they deem them necessary, but we'd failed to give that authority to the people acting through the states. And are we really so naive that we believe that a federal government, which becomes a tyranny, will propose appropriate amendments to restrain its own tyranny?" As I look back across the centuries, I imagine the assembled delegates laughing about that question. The answer is as obvious today as it was no doubt then. And Madison's notes, in fact, reflect that there was no debate on the matter. It was so obvious to the assembled delegates that if the federal government did indeed exceed the bounds intended by the Constitution, it would never restrain itself, that they inserted unanimously, without the debate, the right for you as state legislators to impose limitations on the federal government by calling a convention of states. And that's why we stand before you today. This is not a partisan issue. This is not about Democrats versus Republicans. It's not an ideological issue. It's not about liberals versus conservatives. We hear a lot about those particular fights in the country today. This is a fight that involves a single question in America today, and I would argue that this is the most important question facing the body politic in America today, and that question is, who decides? Do Tennesseans decide for Tennessee? Or do bureaucrats in a faraway Washington, D.C. decide for Tennessee? That is not a partisan question, and the polling supports what I'm telling you here today. 72% of Americans today say that the federal government is too big, does too much, and is too involved in our lives. A majority of Americans, again, this is not partisan, a majority of Americans say the greatest threat to our rights and liberties is the federal government itself. So today, the American people stand united against a federal government that's grown out of control, that's broken all bounds intended by the founders and drafted into the Constitution. And the question is, what do we do about it? And I would posit this to you. George Mason and our founders and the framers of that convention had a message for you. They considered you special. And I literally mean you sitting here today, you state legislators. They set you up personally as the last line of defense for liberty in the United States of America. If everything ran away, if we had what they couldn't even imagine, trillion-dollar deficits, if we had a federal government trying to regulate puddles in your backyard, they sent you a note in the bottle across the centuries asking you to step into the breach. They gave you unique and incredible authority. Only you, as state legislators, have the right to call for such a convention. Only you, as state legislators, have the right to appoint the delegates to such a convention and to control those delegates. Only you have the right, as states, to ratify what would come out of any convention. It's not just a right, it's a moral obligation. The republic is at risk. Every republic in the history of the world has failed for the same reasons we're struggling today. So the question that I think you need to ask yourselves is, will we take the opportunity? Will we uphold the moral obligation that was given to us by the founders to save this republic from the fate that has befallen all republics before us? Today, 34 states are considering this resolution all across the nation. Florida, Georgia, Alaska, and Alabama have already affirmed this resolution in both houses by joint resolution. We have a chance to get to convention in 2016. Today is the day, now is the time, and I urge you to support the resolution before you. Thank you for your time.
You want to ask him? Representative Durham, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Can we go
please
back
come
out
back?
of session just for a moment so I can ask a question?
Without objection, out of session.
Could the speaker come? Yeah. My understanding of an Article 5 convention is that it's for a specific purpose. The only reservation that my district has expressed is that perhaps there could be some type of runaway convention. Could you please address how that is not something we should fear?
Sure. So I hear this argument all over the country, the idea of a potential runaway convention. And the founders thought about this. They were very wise in the drafting of the Constitution. There are multiple protections against a runaway convention. The first is the application itself. So you are actually today voting on a resolution, which becomes the application in Congress. That sets the parameters for the convention. And so the convention cannot, in session, discuss anything except what's contained in that. Let's presume they run away and they do something crazy at that convention. They start to do it. You control your own delegates. And you guys actually have passed faithful delegate legislation, which gives you extensive powers, not just to recall those delegates and to void anything they might vote on or discuss, but to actually penalize them criminally. Many states are following in those footsteps. Indiana did that first, and there are many other states that are passing those kind of limitation acts. And then in the end, this is the most important protection, and this is the one that the founders built in themselves that makes this essentially foolproof. In the end, even if we say that something could come out of the convention that we don't like, regardless of our ideology, right or left, it takes 38 states to ratify anything that comes out of this convention. We have to remember this is a convention for proposing amendments. In other words, making suggestions only. And when those suggestions go out to the states, it takes 38 states to ratify, and it's important that we flip that math on its head. That means it takes only 13 states to stop anything that we don't like. I think this is really important from both sides of the aisle. Whether you come from the left or the right, Democrat or Republican, whatever your ideology, you have to look out across the great American landscape and know for anything that one side or the other would consider truly offensive, there are 13 states on the other side that will block that. The only thing literally that can come out of this convention is something that is supported by the great majority of Americans in this country, 38 states supporting it. So we have, from beginning to end, protections that the founders built in for us into this process. It is literally impossible for that process to run away.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I've got a question.
Representative Jernigan, you're recognized.
Thank you. How many states have you said have passed
There
this?
are 4 states that have passed it through both houses as a joint resolution.
4.
Yes, sir.
And how many we're considering
Currently pending in 34 states this legislative session.
this session? Okay. And you'd come to my office in your group, and we had a great discussion. And I told you I thought that, and you say it's a nonpartisan issue, and which then again you kind of say it is when the other states can come in, like California, New York, and block maybe with Tennessee and Georgia, because they ideologically think differently. And I told you that one of my concerns, I guess, was there's a supermajority here, and in the delegate process, because at the end of the day, I told you that Democrats do represent just shy of 1.8 million Tennesseans who would have basically, if it's 2/3 vote on who the delegates can send up there. I'm worried about any kind of minority representation or different school of thought, and that's what my initial concern is. And I don't want to rely on California. I don't want to rely on New York. I would love to see some kind of commitment. I don't know if it'd be through an amendment to have at least one minority representation, to have a voice, because not everybody thinks the same. And my only second concern was to limit the I get the reduce the scope size of government. I get that, but I don't know what that means. And I think even you said no one really knows what it means until you get to the convention, and that kind of concerns me too, because I agree it's big. And some of the things that she cited is good, and I agree with that as well. The size of that book is very large, and that does represent 200 years. It can't stay the same size as, we do grow as a country and nation. So but there are also some good rulings in there, and I guess I would also ask, would those rulings stay, the good ones, and who decides what's good and who's bad? Is that in the convention as well?
Yes, sir. The convention is limited to the topics at hand. Topics at hand are imposing fiscal restraints on the federal government, imposing scope and jurisdictional restraints on the federal government, and a discussion of term limits, including for the Supreme Court and other federal jurists.
And like the representative said, we manage our money really, really well. And I think we're proud of that. But 40% of our budget comes from the federal government. We're third in the nation that's reliant on it. Are we prepared to pass a state income tax if we're short on funds? Because that money's going away. And that's what concerns me, is we're going to find different alternatives to raise revenue, or people are going to, as far as TennCare and health, they'll lose health care, and that's jobs, that's the health industry, it cascades. There's so many uncertainties I get, but I also understand the other side who are just having a conversation and discussing the topic, and I get that too. But I wanted to thank you for coming into my office and having a discussion with me. We lasted about 30 or 45 minutes. It was well thought out. It was articulate, and I appreciate the time you took. Thank you.
My pleasure, and I really appreciated the discussion too. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Hearing none? Wait, I wanted to know, is there anyone here that wants to speak in opposition of SJR 67? Seeing none, we'll go back without objection back into session.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Chairman Sanderson, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Representative Butt, a couple questions. In the resolution itself, There are a couple of things that you're asking for: physical restraints on federal government, limit the power and jurisdiction of federal government, and limit the terms of office. Am I right? Are those three separate things that you're asking for? What?
Those are three separate things that anyone sent to a convention would be allowed to discuss. That's all that is. That opens up the discussion for those three things. Nothing else can be discussed by one of our delegates sent to the convention because we have faithful delegate legislation. It is, as a matter of fact, a felony if they try to discuss anything else.
How big is that umbrella for physical restraints of federal government? You mentioned regulating the EPA, benefits, mandates, funding of school lunch programs, Board of Educations. How big an umbrella are we talking about trying to amend the federal Constitution? To what scope? I realize you say there's three scopes we're limited
Exactly.
to here, but how big is that umbrella?
When we send our delegates to the convention, these are the three topics they may discuss. What they discuss on those topics, certainly up to them. Now, I have been in enough of these meetings to know, as a matter of fact, I've been attending meetings for 2 years, that nothing egregious is going to get out of those state legislators who are those delegates who are there only voting on what their legislators will allow them to vote on. As a matter of fact, the first assembly meeting, we had Democrats, we had Republicans, it was bipartisan. And the one thing everybody really stood up and agreed on was that we need to find a way to rein in federal spending. That was the one thing out of that meeting that everyone agreed on. So once you get to a meeting like that, you've got to have 26 people agree on anything to come out of that. Then you have to have 38 states agree on that. So the bar is so very high for anything to pass.
Well, I want to play on what the representative from Nashville mentioned that if we were to amend the Constitution to say that we would have a balanced budget in our federal government, are we prepared as representative of the state of Tennessee and also trustees of the state of Tennessee, are we prepared for that to happen?
Well, let me mention that that's something that since the governor has been in office, if you've noticed, he's asked each department to take a 5% decrease,
Right.
take a 5% decrease. We are knowing already that that money cannot keep coming for years when we are borrowing 40% of that money already.
Okay, so we amend the Constitution and we say we have to have a balanced budget. Okay, now obviously, as state legislators, we're not running the federal government. So we're turning back over what we've amended the Constitution to our federal leaders and said, okay, now you have to deal with it. Am I right? Is that how that would work?
I don't understand exactly what
Okay,
you're asking.
so we have a constitutional amendment that calls for a balanced budget. We have done that through the Convention of States. Now, we have mandated to the federal government they're going to have a balance. So now our congressmen and our senators are going to have to deal with what we have amended our Constitution. Am I right?
Yes, and as a matter of fact, that is a good point because many states have asked their federal delegations to come and talk with them and let's talk this out in something like a bilateral session or something where we could all get together on this. But most are not willing to do that.
Of course, we've amended our Constitution 27 times. It seems like we're going, and I understand the Convention of States. I've read it. It seems like we're going the back door on this because we've amended the Constitution 27 times, and we've done, regardless of what people think, we've done a pretty good job. I mean, women can now vote, and a lot of things have happened that have been really good on the constitutional amendments. But yet, we've got a Congress that's got the ability to do that, and we're circumventing our own Congress.
No,
So I guess my question would be, why do we keep electing the same folks and sending them to Washington?
You'll have to ask these people that.
It
don't
just
know
seems
that
like
answer.
we are micromanaging our Congress. And also, if I understand, one of the things you mentioned, a limit on terms of office. We're asking to limit the terms in Congress, yet we don't limit the own terms within the legislature of the state of Tennessee.
And all that is open for discussion. Nobody has passed an amendment that says we will do that. Nobody has even passed an amendment that said we would balance the budget. We are asking states to take the lead in asking these questions. And many of those amendments have been passed simply because states were initiating a convention to propose amendments. And Congress said, oh, wait a minute, they're about to have a convention. I think we need to straighten this out. So that has happened several times over the years. And speaking to the point of 40% of our budget coming from the federal government, many times we can cite cases where at least 20% of that money is us complying with all of the mandates that come back with the money. So if we didn't have all of those compliance officers, all of those compliance issues, we could do with less money. We know that as Tennesseans. We are a free, strong state, and we understand how to manage that. But when we decide to take the carrot of the federal funds with all those mandates and regulations, we have to pay for that. And a lot of that federal money is used to do that.
The representative from Williamson County mentioned he'd had a couple people maybe that had some concerns about it, as well as my district. Oddly enough, I've had folks that have called my office in support, also that are not in support. And so it's caused me to look at it, and I've talked to the Senate sponsor of the bill, and I was 100% for it. Then after I got here this week, then we start receiving emails and conversations. People come in the office. It makes me look at it a second time. And then I pull the bill, I looked at the bill, and I pull the amendments that we've also already amended our Constitution. I see things that cause me to question whether or not this is a smart thing to do. And I realize it's something that we need to do, but yet it almost seems as if we are we're circumventing our own Congress, and we're second guessing those guys. And I think that we've got a Constitution that's good. It has endured. It's stable. I think change to our Constitution should be very slow. And this may be a slow change.
It's a
Would you give me
very
the
slow process.
What's the timetable we're talking about if we were to pass this and it moved through our legislature?
If it moves through our legislature, we are the fifth state then to have passed this through the legislature. As Mark Meckler stated, it is in 34 other state legislatures this year. So that is a total of 38. It takes 34 making this same proposal for it then to go to Congress to call the convention. So possibly the middle of next year, a convention could be called. Now remember, this is a convention not to do anything with the Constitution that we have except to propose amendments to the Constitution. Okay. That's all this does.
Okay, so if we call for the Constitution, then what is the timetable from that point to where we actually do something?
Well, my understanding is with the ERA amendment, it never was fully ratified by 38 states, and it's still out there. So that would depend on the delegation, the convention who puts a time limit on states ratifying the amendment. What that time limit would be, that would be up to the convention.
Okay. I appreciate the work that you've done. I appreciate your knowledge, and I respect you a lot. Like I said, I came up here fully supported the bill, and I'm not saying I'm not supporting it now. I'm just second guessing it a little bit. Like I said, I've heard from both sides actually in my office, and both sides have good arguments. I think you would agree. We have friends on both sides. This is one of those bills you have friends that are on both sides of the issue, and it makes it very, very difficult.
It does.
Thank you.
I agree with that. But I think looking at our proposition here, we are saying we trust our state legislature and the people closest to us, our delegates, to go up there and represent the people. And we're not circumventing Congress. We're just taking another option that is given to us in Article 5 of the Constitution. So I don't see that as circumventing Congress, but just taking our option as states. And states are the last bastion for our citizens.
Chairman Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Representative, thank you very much for bringing this bill. I'm voting yes today, and for large part because of the fact that I feel like the fiscal responsibility that we hold so dear here in Tennessee has been lost on our federal counterparts. And I know previously we have voted on balanced budget amendments. We have voted to instruct and encourage and have resolutions to try to ask our federal counterparts whom we gave the authority to be able to make this one nation. And I think that's important to hold on to, is we're not circumventing anything here, but we're stepping back into the role that the founders originally intended for us to be in, which is that this is a nation that is the United States of America. And I am proud to be an American and also proud to be a Tennessean. So,
Thank you. Thank you.
Representative Jernigan, you're recognized.
Thank you. I have two questions. Do you agree that there should be some minority representation that goes up there, or just whatever the 2/3 of the body suggests.
Of course, all of our states are made up differently, and as it is here in Tennessee, as it is in California, each state will have to decide as their delegates. They can send 5 delegates. There'll be 1 vote per state, but they can send as many delegates as they want to discuss these things. So there can be representation of lots of people.
Well, I mean as far as, okay. Okay, I'll move on from that. You think that we would be able to fiscally exist at the same level that we are now without federal money? I'll take TennCare, for example. It's a voluntary program. We don't have to participate in that. We can pull out right now if we wanted to. We don't. It's an $8 billion, it's 1/3 of our budget. But do you think we'd be able to still provide that level of health care, knowing what health care costs are, and that's not going to be part of that we can still sustain?
And understanding that a lot of that money that comes back to us is our money, also, that we sent to the federal government. And ideally,
Well, it's the other states' money too.
and the other states might too, that's exactly right. Ideally, we would talk about the Congress, and is beginning to talk about block granting that back to our states and allowing us to manage that money the best way we know how. So I think, yes, that's another conversation that Congress is having about blocking that money back to us and us being able to manage. Because as I stated in my opening, with a lot of those things, there are so many mandates that we're paying a lot of that money to fulfill those mandates and things to comply with the federal government.
And some mandates are good. The ADA is an unfunded mandate. I benefit from it every day. We would be able just to scrap that because we no longer get,
And I trust Tennesseans to make those decisions. Tennesseans will make those decisions. I trust Tennesseans to do that.
I get that, but it's also, we're in a super majority to where, we can't even have debate without being blocked. So it's one ideal, one thought, one ideology will come out of that without any kind of minority representation is what I'm talking about. So it's really, the power would come back to the states, and then, to just run right over us again. And then without any kind, and I get it. Democrats need to win elections. I mean, if they want to start, and I understand that, but of course then we have the gerrymandering, the money that's in politics, and how impossible that is these days. There's too much money in it, I think. And I would love to see, and I told one of the speakers, I'd love to see Citizens United in part of this. Now, I voted for the last Article 5 with the balanced budget. I think it is out of control. But with the other 2 topics, I don't know what limited federal government means. I just don't know what it means. It's so broad. The FDA.
It means they can't look at our pond from a computer probably and say, oh, yes, we have to regulate
I
that.
like knowing what's in my shampoo. I mean, I like to know when they regulate certain things that there is consumer protection.
And there are some things like that that certainly we do agree on. We agree with that. But as with our Department of Environment here, our Department of Environment knows how to take care of the state of Tennessee. I trust Tennessee departments to take care of our property. We are good stewards. We care about that too. So I think that this is our opportunity as a state and as the states to make our voice heard and look at these things, open this discussion, and have this discussion. The high bar of 38 states will keep anything egregious from coming out.
Thank you, Representative.
Mm-hmm.
Representative Shaw, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Chair, thank you for bringing the bill. First of all, I'm going to say to you that I'm not going to put any butter on your bread, because what you're asking today is to what I've already seen happen, government by the people. And I want to take you back for a moment. My daddy decided that he wanted to register to vote, and it was government by the people at the local level who put him out of his home because he did. Because the federal government said he had a right to vote. But the folks at the local level, at the county commission, said if you do, you can't stay here. So I know what government by the people represent. It represents one group of people ruling everything. But then I want to bring you forward. Because if we are going to do all the right things in Tennessee, I wonder why this legislature didn't take our money that Washington had for us and pass health care to keep people from dying. That's government. So when you tell me that we're going to change the Constitution. And I thank God for prayer, and I thank God for my daddy, because I thought hard and long about this morning, because folk here today came into my office and talked to me. We even prayed together. But my daddy spoke to me. He said, son, that's why you are in Nashville, so that the same thing that happened to me don't happen again. Everybody needs some kind of oversight. Tennessee needs some oversight. The federal government needs some oversight, everybody. But when you turn everything over to a supermajority of people in one state, there's going to be a whole lot of folks left out of a whole lot of stuff. I mean, you know it and I know it. We can sit here and we can make all these long speeches about how it's going to be and how easy it's going to be and whatever else is going to happen. But we know, and we know well, that there's going to be a group of people that are not going to get represented when you can take one group to decide for everybody else. I get up every morning and I watch my TV, and there's 4 or 5 people that tell me what's going to happen in this nation every day. They don't give the rest of the people a voice to decide. So I think, above all, if we were going to do anything, we need to have a balanced government here before we try to tell Washington what to do. Because when you look at us in Tennessee, we really don't have no grounds to talk about Washington, because we just about like Washington. We pass what we want to pass, and we deny what we want to deny. And we may as well stand up to the plate and face the facts. And the facts are there are going to be a whole lot of folk left out if we pass this article. Now, it might pass. I'm not saying it won't. But if we pass it, we're not going to have equal representation and all those things that you telling me that my poor old daddy had to go through. We're going to start going through it again, because it's going to be a certain group of people who are going to make those decisions for me. And I want to be able to make my own decisions as well. I came here to represent a group of people. And every day of my life, I try to represent them. But I try to do it in a fair way. And out of 15 and almost 16 years, I never woke up the next morning regretting no decision I made yesterday. Because I pray about it, and I want to be honest about it. And I said this morning, and I'll say again, there's one thing going to change us, and that's when a man's heart change, not when something is written down on paper. We can have a thick book of the Constitution, a thick book of everything else. We got laws now that are broken right here in this state every day. So don't tell me that passing a law and changing the Constitution is going to make folks better. What's going to make people better is when they get a higher power in their hearts to do the right thing for the people that sent them here. So I don't see where I'm going to better myself at all in the people that I represent to pass your article. I hear what you're saying, but that's just talk. I don't see where anything's going to get any better than it is right now. Thank you.
Representative Powell, you're recognized.
Respectfully, if I may reply, yes. And Johnny Shaw, you know that I'm a praying person also, and that most of the people in the state of Tennessee have those same values. As far as praying every single day for wisdom to do the right thing for our constituents, I think every one of us, and at least the vast majority of us, do that. And I do. I pray for wisdom every single day. And something that you have said here about not listening to the voice of the people, this is the voice of the people, being able to get together and discuss these things. This is our voice. It's the voice afforded to us in Article 5.
Representative Shaw.
Madam Chair, she called my name. No, I don't think this is the voice of all the people. This is the voice of a group of people that you've got together. I mean, there again, let's be fair about this. This is not the voice of all the people. And I think it was brought up a while ago. There are thousands of people in Tennessee, and I've gotten emails. I've got as many emails for this as against this. So it's not all the people. I think it's the people who want to make all the decisions for the other people. That's who I think it is. And if we're going to pray, let's make sure we pray unto the God that's going to give us a true answer and that is to be for all of the people and love them all.
Representative Powell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple questions here, and I do certainly appreciate all the feedback I've gotten, both for and against this, as most members of this committee have probably similarly received a lot of emails and calls about this. So thank you. It's always great to see when people are part of the democratic process and involved with government. Wanted to raise a couple questions here. So we're limited to the faithful delegate process, correct?
Yes.
But other states might not be bound by that same process. Is that correct?
At this point, I think the 4 or 5 that have passed this are, to my knowledge. Most of them are passing faithful delegate legislation.
Okay, but it's possible you could have 38 states, and not all 38 states would have faithful delegate legislation in place, correct?
Yes, 34. It takes 34 to
I'm
call.
sorry. So 34. So it's possible you could
Yes.
have some states that wouldn't have faithful delegates. What concerns me is the topics that are listed here. We would be limited to those topics, and while other states might not necessarily be limited to those same topics. So it's possible that some things could emerge, and I see head shaking, but
Because this is the call that all 34 states
so
are
all
passing.
34 states would have to pass the exact same thing,
Yes.
calling on the exact 3 topics.
Yes, that's exactly right.
And that couldn't be outside of those topics
Can't
whatsoever.
be outside of those topics. And I will mention that Congress has now put a committee in place who would count the calls and make sure that they have the same content. That committee has been put in place, so they understand that the process is going on.
Well, there's a couple of missions here. I mean, one is, I know it's been brought up as campaign finance reform. I mean, I think our campaign finance system is broken and needs complete overhaul. I'm disappointed to not see that in this. You know, I think the way that we gerrymander our districts and elect Congress is totally a broken system, and it's created a complete partisan mess. And while they can't get anything done in D.C., unfortunately, we're starting to bring that to the state level too, with the way that districts are drawn. And so I think those are 2 of the greatest concerns that affect us. And for those reasons, if we're limited to those and we can't even address what I consider to be 2 of the biggest burdens currently exist in government, that gives me pause.
But the great news about that is, say this convention does work in a couple of years, we come out with something that 38 states have agreed on. If you want to bring those things to a convention, I'm sure state legislators will be more likely to do that. So they need to see that we have this process, that could work even for your concerns.
Well, I do think if you call a convention of states, it needs to be, I don't think we should be calling a convention of states every year. I mean, I think there's controls in place that are very deliberate, that make sure that the items that are discussed, when there is a convention of states, it's a rare occurrence, not a regular occurrence. And so, you know, there's things that I have some serious issues with that I think need to be fixed too, that are problems that are with a broken system that aren't addressed in this, and that's what gives me pause.
And we have 2 ways to do that, either through your congressman or through this Article 5 Convention of the States. Those are 2 ways to address that are given to us in the Constitution.
All right, thank you.
Chairman Sanderson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll make it brief. I do like the idea of this. Let me ask you, under the limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, could our Second Amendment rights be addressed in there?
Our Second Amendment rights might be addressed, but the fact of the matter is you would never get 38 states to agree on taking away any Second Amendment rights. As a matter of fact, I don't think that our rights in the amendment are what we're talking about discussing here. There's not anybody I know who are talking about taking away our Second Amendment rights. 38 states would have to agree to that, and 13 could shut that out in a minute.
What about the same-sex marriage?
Of course, I understand in Tennessee we're addressing that through the courts. This is something where Tennessee, and this is a whole other subject we're getting off on here, but Tennessee has decided that was an overreach by the judicial system to say that they made a law to override every law on the state books in Tennessee. So we are addressing that through the courts at this point.
So, but if 38 states were to say, or 34 states were to say, we feel like the federal government overstretched in their interpretation of same-sex marriages, and this could definitely be addressed within this Article 5.
Possibly, but the fact is 38 states would have to agree with that for that to ever pass.
Okay. What happened, the representative from Nashville mentioned there was the last convention of the states, last Article 5. What happened to that? Where are we on that one?
Well, You mean when they actually had a convention?
No, I think we passed this resolution with limited, I think it was to the term limits or something last
Yes,
time.
but that is not, I may
Balanced
have
budget,
to
I'm
ask
sorry.
Mark about that because I'm not familiar with where that one is at this point because a lot of those, they had to say exactly the same verbiage as ours has done. So I don't know where they are with that. And if you want to go out of session and ask Mark about that.
But you think your interpretation was that not everybody had the exact same verbiage, therefore it didn't progress?
That's right. If you don't have the same verbiage, it does not progress.
So on this particular situation, this time, all the states have got the same resolution.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Oh, Representative Holster, you were recognized.
I'm back on the elementary side of this thing. I was all fine until you said about the Second Amendment, because folks have contacted my office and said Second Amendment it could be affected here. But based on what you said earlier, it's got to be one of these
It's
three
gotta
topics,
be one of these three
period.
things.
And Second Amendment in one of those topics.
That's right. That's right.
So
And if you
it-
want to
it-
go out of session and ask Mark to speak to that, that would be great.
No, that's all right. At
Okay.
the end of the day,
It's
it comes
not in
down
the
to that.
scope.
It's got to be these three topics, and all the states have to agree on it, and that's what they're going to
That's right.
discuss when they get there.
That's exactly
And they
right.
can't go outside that.
That's right.
And the other side of that is the federal government's going on $19 trillion in debt, refused to do absolutely nothing about it. It's all going to collapse if states don't do something about it.
That's right. That's
That's
exactly
correct.
right. Thank you very much. Madam Speaker, and I'm going to ask for a roll call vote.
Resolution passes. It moves out to calendar and rules.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee. I appreciate it very much.